Hello and welcome to another episode of Roundtable Discussions organized by Troy University's Quality Enhancement Plan and the Big Read, a grant made possible by National Endowment for Arts. For our college reading initiative as well as our Big Read, the book that we chose is none other than Ray Bradbury's Farenheit 451. And to discuss the book with us today, we have a very important and interesting group of panelists. It's very relevant because, in the words of Bradbury himself, he wrote this book not to predict the future, but to prevent it. And we have here with us the future itself. We have a set of undergraduate students from Troy University who have read the book and have discussed it. And more importantly, I'm super excited about this because they are my students from my composition class. Let me go ahead and introduce you to them. We've got Elizabeth Reid, Abna Adobe, Nicholas Dobos, Xiaodong Lee, and Marissa Davis. Welcome to the panel. Let's begin talking about the book and reading in general. So we've got this book, right? We read it in class and we discussed it. It's about Guy Montag, who was very obedient in the beginning, right? And listened to the law of burning books. And suddenly he turns around, right? And he starts to question what happens if he challenges the existing rule, right? And what would change, right, fundamentally because of reading, right? So why is it so important to him that books survive? What do you think? Elizabeth, let's begin with you.
I think books hold like a piece of history, whether they're fact or fiction. Yes. So the writer is in some point in time, and he's writing about the trends and the ideas that that time period has. So I think it's important for them to survive so that you hold on to that history and you hold on to those thoughts and point of views that were in their time.
So it's like a time capsule, right? It captures that time period. What else? Do any one of you have anything more to say about it? Why else? Why else is this so important to Guy Montag? Why is this reading process? Yes.
I think a lot of what Ray Bradbury was trying to do is trying to represent himself in Guy Montag, how, you know, like what he would have done in the position where if he had been raised and told that books are bad and, you know, that books need to be burned, and it to be his job, that he would eventually at some point snap and switch to the point where he realized that books are a lot more than what society tells you that they are. So if it were to be him in his shoes, he would have done what Guy Montag did. So.
Right. And I'm reminded about the introduction here of the 60th anniversary edition by Neil Gaiman, right? He says, this is a book about caring for things. It's a love letter to books. And it's a love letter to people. It's a love letter to the world itself, right? So what kinds of skills, right, do we gather as a human kind itself through reading of books? Abna, what are your thoughts?
I think when we read books, and it's different from watching television where like we're listening to stuff, we're seeing stuff. Yeah. It's like we're watching someone's perspective on something. Yeah. But when we read, we form our own perspectives. I use this example, if we read about rainfall and we hear the rainfall and we smell the rainfall, so it's our own perspective on it. And it sort of also builds our analytical skills because we're forming our own ideas. We're interpreting the book. So.
Right. So you sort of feel an empathy with the character, right? What do you think, Marissa?
Whenever I read a book, I know I read more into words than I do when I see something on a TV screen or hear it over the radio. Reading words puts different meaning into the story. I know whenever I study the Bible, I like to study, whenever it will say love in a Bible verse, and there's about three to five different words for love in the Greek and Hebrew language. So you can interpret it different ways. I know the same is for English. Words can mean different things. Mm-hmm. So whenever you actually read it in a book, you can get different meanings from when you see it on a screen.
Yeah. Wonderful. And this is a very relevant question to the younger generation, right? So Bradbury says you don't have to burn books to destroy a culture. You just have to stop reading it, right? What is the current pulse, right, in terms of reading? Do you guys read? Do you find time to read? I'm not talking about essential mandatory reading for your class, right? But do you find time to read for pleasure? If yes, right? Or have people stopped reading altogether? Shidong.
In my younger times, I really miss the days when I with my mother to sit down to read a book all the afternoon. And now, when I get to college, when I enter the college, I find that I have no time to read. Just some things peacefully come in my life, and I don't know why, and I don't know what's the importance of doing these things.
Right.
I just feel no time to read. But when I turn on my cell phones, I feel like that I get a new world and to read by myself.
Okay. So you turn off your cell phone, and then he gets a new world to read. That's
yes,
wonderful.
I'm not the center of the world. The world can still move without me. I mean, in 2 hours it's okay.
Yes.
So I really enjoy the time to read.
Right. So you turn off your cell phone. You know that you're not the center of the world, and then you find time to read. That's wonderful. And I especially enjoyed your little memory of going back to the time when you sat with your mother to
Yes.
read. Do the rest of you have any?
Yeah,
yes.
definitely.
Do you want to share that with us, Nicholas? We'll start with you.
Well, my mother was really started me off really young with reading all the time. She was always reading me. I was the second child, and she always wanted to make sure that she was always improving with how she raised her children. She always read to me. We were always doing like math problems and all sorts of educational things, but well before I even began any sort of preschool or anything. So it's always been with me from a very young age.
Okay. Do you remember the first book that you could read on your own?
I think it was the Bernstein Bears, or is that what it's called? With the little bears? I don't know. It was something like that.
Okay. Wonderful. What about you, Abna?
I come from Ghana, and where we lived, we didn't have like a public library. So whenever my mom wanted to get us books, she would have to like travel to the nearby city, Kumasi, and then she would bring back a big box of books for my sister because I was too young to read. So when my sister would read, she actually taught me how to read. She would teach me how to read. So I began with reading my sister's books, and I still remember the first book I ever read. Yeah.
Wonderful. What about you, Elizabeth?
I don't remember the first book I read. I just remember my dad always found the time when I was little to sit down and read with me, and eventually it just turned into me reading to him instead of him reading to me.
Okay. And you, Marissa?
Well, I actually started reading when I was really young because before I started school, my mom, she homeschooled my older brother. He was 2 years older than me. So I actually started reading when I was about 2, so I can't remember. Yes. Apparently I caught on really quick. I can't remember it, but my mom says I would sit and read books with my older brother, and I know I really like the Dr. Seuss books.
I want to pick up on another thing that Xiaodong had mentioned about turning off your cell phone, right? The interference or sometimes a boon. I don't know. Okay, I want to hear what you guys have to say about this. The interference of technology and how it has affected us in terms of relaxed reading. Is that even possible? How often do you do this? Do you consciously turn off your cell phones, or how do you find time to read? Because one of the most important things Bradbury talks about in the book, in order for a sort of a complete and creative sort of a community, is to have leisure, right? Leisure. How do you find leisure away from technology? How do you do this, Shidong?
Just I can do nothing if I take my cell phone to a library. So every time I just put my cell phone at my dorm and went to library to do something, and just like that. And I find that there are some news every day. I spend hours to read the news, but it's not that important. I feel just like the information are so peaceful here, so you just ignore them and concentrate what you really want.
So
Right.
there is so much information in the form of news, media, just bombarding, right, itself onto you. You need to ignore that and find what is relevant for you, right?
Yes.
Okay, what do you think, Marissa?
There's so much going on, especially I know whenever I get on Facebook, my friends on Facebook like to post a bunch of news stories and things that they don't really matter. It's like, oh, this lady got pushed down today. Oh no, she fell. But it's not something that's really relevant for me. So I have to sort through all of that to find something that's really going to make an impact on my life. So what I like to do is I like to just turn it all off, because with GroupMe, with class, I'm constantly getting text messages. So I just turn off my phone and I'll grab a newspaper and sit there and read that, or I'll grab a book, a novel, and sit and read for a couple of hours, and it's really peaceful.
Do you have something to say, Elizabeth? Yes.
Most of the time when I want to read, I normally read at night. So I put aside about an hour, 2 hours before I go to bed to just kind of turn off my computer, and just set my phone aside and just read and relax before I go to bed. It helps kind of like wind down for the day and think about things. So.
Nice. Okay. And you, Abna?
It's really difficult for me to find time to read, so I sort of like squeeze it in whenever I have time. I don't know, like between classes is the best time for me, because then I'm in the school mood, so I'm just reading everything.
And you, Nick?
A lot with the whole technology use and having leisure. I think that cell phones and the ability and the wanting to always use a cell phone is like the very definition of leisure. But I think it's just how people choose to use that leisure. It's just choosing to be on your cell phone or to be actually reading a book. And when it comes to me, like, I actually use the internet and my cell phone a lot to try to find what I want to read next, because I think that as a whole, reading brings people together as a society, and they can relate to things that they would have never been able to relate to before because of how a story or a novel or an article has made them feel. So I think that it's a double-edged sword. The cell phone can be bad, but it can be, or the internet in general could be bad, and it can be great. So
Right, and how do you? There are so many books, right? There's so much written word, printed word, right? How do you weed through this and say, this is what I want to read, right? How do you do that? I'm curious about the process of elimination here, right? How do you pick the book that you want to read? Is there a magic number, or how do you do this? I'm just curious, because for me, you're still in undergraduate school. You're still finding what is interesting for you, right? You're the future. You're young. How do you choose that, right? We'll begin with you.
Okay. When I go to a bookstore or library, I see so many books, and I think I cannot read them all my life. So here is a rule that I chose that, except for Fitzgerald, right? Fitzgerald. I never read a book which was not published during 15 years, which was already published because of time. Select them to be a very classic book.
Okay,
Did you say 50 years?
50 years?
So he would choose books that were published only 50 years ago, so that by the time 50 years is over, he hopes that if those books were not relevant, it would fall out of print.
Yeah,
One
it's
hopes,
much
right?
more classic.
But why Fitzgerald? I'm curious. You like Fitzgerald?
Yeah, I like him very much. I like his writing style, so that to describe the time.
Okay, so that is the exception.
Yeah.
Okay. What about you, Marissa? How do you choose a book?
Whenever I go to the bookstore, I honestly go to the sales section a lot, because I just love books, and if I go to the regular section, then I'll end up buying about $20 books, and then that's $100 I've spent, and I can't do that. But I go to the sales section, and I just browse through and find one where I might like the cover, and then read the back, and maybe flip through a couple pages and see if I feel like it would connect with my life in a certain way, or see if I feel like there's anything that I can learn from that book. Because I'd rather read a book where I feel like I've learned something than just read a story that makes me feel good.
Okay, that makes sense. And you, Elizabeth?
I do judge a book by its cover. But I actually go for like mystery and like adventure type stories. I just think they kind of work your mind a little differently, trying to figure out what the characters are going to do and what's going to happen. But to weed through it, I look online and I look for like critic reviews and stuff of the book and see what they think of the book, and if there's good reviews, most of the time I'll pick it up and read it.
So you're using technology to your advantage
Yes.
there, right? Yes, wonderful. And Abner?
I tend to pick only the things I'm interested in. So first of all, I begin with the genre. If it's like fantasy or science fiction, then I'll look at it. I'll like actually pick it up, and then I look at the reviews online, like Elizabeth. And then if it has really, really good reviews, then I'll read a summary, and then I'll actually, yeah, but not the ending, just the overview.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Right.
But does that, take away the pleasure of
No, 'cause
having to
I mean, it's like reading the back of the book, but just more like
a
information.
little more detail?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, and Nick?
I definitely just use public opinion as my main factor for what I start looking into, because if there's so many people that are in love raving about a book, then the chances are it's probably going to be pretty good, and it's probably worth looking into, and that's usually how I pick my books.
But we just want to sell the books.
Yeah.
What if they just want to sell the books?
Well, no, I mainly towards what people like me like the book. People my age, people in college, a lot of people are reading it. Not the people who actually own the books and are trying to say that it's good, but the people who have read it and know that it's good.
Okay,
That's
that's
what
good.
else,
Yeah, that's like-minded people.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
Okay. So we talked about leisure. 3 most important things that Bradbury says is necessary for a creative society, right? We talked about leisure. Okay, you cheat to read, right? Then we talked about quality of information, right? How do we find the right sort of a book, right? You all have your own strategies in finding the book, right? And the last thing that he talks about is the right to act out this sort of a learning or an understanding or information, right? And that comes very close to censorship, right? Okay, so you've learned this, you've understood this, right? How do we act it out, right? How do we process it in our mind, and how do we present it to the world, right? Especially for my international students, Shidong from China and Abna from Ghana, and I myself grew up in India and Oman, right? What does this mean to you or mean to us? And my students from different parts of America, right? What does it mean to you in terms of the freedom to act out the information that you have chosen and enjoyed because there is leisure, right? Abna, what do you have something to say about this?
The freedom, what I think about the freedom to act out. I guess when we read, first of all, we're given without reading, you never learn different, you never have different perspectives, you never know to question.
Yes.
So being able to read will first of all give you the information you need to question, to know what freedom is, to know all these
You're
core
curious.
values that humans have. So in Ghana, that's the thing about living in Ghana. Even when we don't have a lot of we don't have a lot of resources, but even when we do, and even when we read, there's acting them out. We kind of differentiate. We read and then we act differently. We don't act according to what we read. That's what I'm trying to say in general.
Is this because there is quite an amount of pressure from various sources of power to behave in a particular way?
Yeah.
Do you see a future though where through reading and through mass education that there could be a future where people would be able to enact what they've read and understood?
Yeah.
Are you hopeful about it?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, more younger people don't read as much.
I see.
So, I guess maybe in the future, and the authorities don't care what we think. So.
Right. So it's a precarious sort of.
Yeah.
Do you see the difference when you're in the United States? Do you see the difference between how it is there and how it is here?
Yeah, I mean, in Ghana, we're more concerned with forcing information into the minds of students. It's not like where you're allowed to be creative and stuff.
Sure.
So as long as you're learning what they're forcing you to learn, then maybe you can act on it. But if you're not and you have like, oh, we need freedom, we need like corruption should end and all that stuff, that doesn't fly.
Okay. All right. What about you, Xiaodong?
It's interesting that I had a history class in China and I take history class here. And I read a book by Winston Churchill. It's World War II. It's about his memory of the World War.
So you read a book in a history class called World War II by Winston Churchill, British Prime Minister.
Yeah, it's him.
Okay.
And then I find that all the things they said is different. In China's history books, they tell something like that, and American history books, they tell something like that, and in Winston Churchill's book, they tell something
completely
totally different.
Right.
So I want to discover what is what really the truth is. Really. The same thing in three different ways is kind of complicated.
Complicated,
why?
yes.
Yeah, why is that different?
So the way knowledge gets disseminated is very important too, right?
Yes.
This is a classic example of a very tragic and a very important historical event, right? World War II. He reads it differently in his Chinese class, he reads it differently in his American history class, and now he's reading a book by the British Prime Minister who has a completely different take on it. What is truth, right?
What is truth?
Actually, on that topic, I had an exchange friend that came over here from Germany, came to my hometown of Robertsdale, and we got to be friends, and we started talking about historical events, and she said that in Germany they ignore World War II. They don't want to talk about it because they're embarrassed by what Germany did in the past. So whenever she came over to the U.S. and her class started studying World War II, she was a little shocked. She was like, "We don't study this. We don't talk about this in Germany." So she actually learned a lot too, coming to the U.S. and hearing a different side.
And it's similar to what Guy Montag does too, right? He's
Censorship.
right.
Yes,
He's been told to do certain things, right? He believes that, and then Mrs. Hudson, right, sets herself on fire along with her books, and there's a paradigm shift, right? He's curious. He challenges authority, right? Abna, we are very hopeful about Ghana, right? But I also want to ask you, what are you reading right now, right? What are you reading for pleasure? Can you give me a name of a book that you're reading, right? And something about it, right? Elizabeth, what are you reading right now?
I'm actually reading a series of Frankenstein books written by Dean Koontz.
Okay.
And it's very relatable to Farenheit 451 because it's about trying to create a utopian society. But, society's not really, you can't really be happy if there's no troubles to overcome, If there's no,
if
there's no
it's
goal,
like paradise,
if there's no goal in life, are you really happy just living life, So.
And happiness, as mentioned in Fahrenheit 451, becomes very relevant.
Right.
Is it the same story of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein?
It's actually, it's kind of like a sequel. It's actually written in present day, so it's 200 years after Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. So
interestingly, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was one of our college reading initiative books.
Really?
Yes, a couple of years ago. Yeah. And Abna, what are you reading?
Well, the most recent book I read that sort of had anything to do with Fahrenheit 451 was 1984. And in that book, the main
George Orwell.
George Orwell's like 1984.
1984?
1984.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in the book, there's this authority, Big Brother, and they monitor everything. It's illegal to think the wrong things. Like, there's a thought crime. So that's how bad it is. And the main character, like Guy Montag, he kind of gets curious and he wants to join the other side, like fight against the Big Brother. And yeah, it's a lot like Fahrenheit 451 actually.
Were you able to see the connection when you read it?
Yes.
Were you pulling up your memory from?
And one thing, like they invented in 1984, they had this thing called Newspeak, and they were constantly like changing the language and distilling it like down. So the politically charged words or like words that made people think of rebellion were removed from the language entirely.
Yes.
And I feel like that's I mean, it's scary, but
Yeah, and
it's
you've
sort
thought
of like
about
what's
it,
going on,
right? You
yeah.
were thinking about it. Very good. And Nicholas?
Well, I'm reading a series of books by George R.R. Martin, Game of Thrones. I'm sure people have heard of it. And it's a
Don't tell me you're watching
the
the-
opposite. I have watched.
Okay.
It's a different type of read than Farenheit 451. He really does do a fantastic job of creating a world and showing that world from as many different perspectives as possible, which is something in Farenheit 451. It's very linear. You're seeing it from one person's perspective, and you see his perspective change. But this is more of an evolving world where things are constantly changing, and you're seeing it from multiple characters' perspectives. That every chapter is seen from a different character's perspective, and it's really interesting read. I really like it. It's very enjoyable.
Nice. And you?
And I also read the story of your life, written by Tate Chang, is science fiction, and they told a story about the language and how language influences the way of thinking. It's interesting.
Yeah, how language influences a way of thinking, similar to what you were saying, right?
Yeah.
Deleting words can do such a lot of harm for our society. And Marissa, yes.
I'm actually reading a series by Anna Carey. It's the Eve trilogy. And in Eve, this girl named Eve, she is put into a government-run school after most of the world's population is wiped out by a plague. And the information that she learns in the schools, she finds out her graduation day, it's all completely corrupted and changed to what the government wants them to know and wants them to hear. And the girls in the school, there's no boys, they are actually taught that men are evil except for the king, and they're not allowed to read any books. So she sneaks into the library with her friends and starts reading. But anyway, she breaks out of the school and starts learning more and more, specifically from books. And then in once, the second book in the series, she actually plans to overthrow the government.
Sounds really familiar.
Yeah. It's a really interesting series.
Okay, that's wonderful. It's so exciting to hear that you all are reading and you're really engaging with books, I want to conclude by a popular, I guess, quote from T.S. Eliot: "We may yet have hope in the future of mankind." Right? Here is a classic representation of that. Thank you again for joining us for this roundtable. We hope you'll join us again the next time. Till then, goodbye.